Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Hall, and I'm the middle school director at Trinity, and it's my pleasure to be able to moderate tonight's panel. I'm excited about the 3 Trinity parents we have who are also experts on the vaccine and in the medical field who are going to talk to us tonight and answer your questions. And I'm going to turn it over to them right now, and they're going to introduce themselves and get started. Thank you.
Great. So I guess I'll go first. I'm Mark Piehl, parent of 1 current Trinity student and 2 graduated. And a quick disclaimer is I don't know that I would consider myself a vaccine expert, but I'm a practicing physician. I practice mostly pediatric critical care, which means I take care of kids in the ICU, the ER, trauma room, and have a lot of experience with treating kids with vaccine preventable diseases, and now one of which includes now COVID, so coronavirus. So Dr. Denton asked us to come and share our perspective on the importance of and safety of the coronavirus vaccines, and I'm happy to give mine. I guess my unique perspective would be that I am in general a believer in vaccinations that have been well tested and have demonstrated good efficacy, and the coronavirus is no different. And in fact, have cared for a large number of kids with either coronavirus or its complications, and I'm excited about the opportunity to get everyone vaccinated and start seeing less of this disease. So I'll hopefully have more to say as we go, but I want to turn over to the other real experts on the panel who will introduce themselves.
Hi, good evening. My name is Adia Ross, and I am a hospitalist physician and also the Chief Medical Officer at Duke Regional Hospital. I have also currently served for the last several months as our COVID medical director for 2 of our clinics at Southern High School and also at DRH proper. And I have been, as far as my experience, I've been an administrator and also a doctor on the front line. And you know, I guess the reason why I want to got my vaccine was just, you know, some of the things that Mark kind of said. We've all seen a lot of things. We all miss seeing our families, and really believe in the science behind the vaccine. And that's what we are here to kind of talk to you guys about. We are excited about the possibility of teachers getting vaccinated because you guys are also on the front line. And they're there for our children, and we cannot do what we're doing without you. And so excited about that. I want to make sure you guys have the information that you need to make an informed decision. I'll turn it over to Libby.
Hi, everyone. I'm Libby Dodds Ashley. I'm the parent of 2 current Trinity students, 1 in 6th grade, 1 in 2nd grade, and a former Trinity student. I am super excited to be here to help you with any questions you have about the vaccine. I think one ground rule for tonight is there is no such thing as a simple or an inappropriate question. We all have spent the year learning a lot about this. So I'm a pharmacist in the ID division at Duke, and my role in COVID has largely been to help the physicians and other pharmacists assess all these new therapies that have been coming at us very quickly. And most recently, the vaccine. You probably saw on the news, there's even new data on a new vaccine tonight that we've spent the day on. So we are here to help you get the answers that you need to make your informed decision about vaccination. We're super excited. What we plan to do tonight is, because this is a new vaccine technology, we want to spend a few minutes going over just a little bit of the background. And that's how we have these slides. We really want to acknowledge our colleagues at Vanderbilt Health. The team of researchers that I work with at Duke work very closely with the team at Vanderbilt. And a couple of physicians who are actually married to each other, Kip and Tom Talbot, prepared these slides for a presentation they gave to an organization of independent schools. And they were great slides, and they very kindly shared them with us. So we want to acknowledge our colleagues at Vanderbilt and thank them for letting us use their materials. So coronavirus, and talking about vaccines. If I could have the next slide, please. You've probably heard that the vaccine is here, but even having the vaccine doesn't mean that everything changes. And that's because vaccines are just one layer of our approach to help protecting us from coronavirus. So the other layers, and this is a Swiss cheese model, we use this a lot in healthcare. So what we do to try to keep our patients safe is we always try to line up enough slices of cheese so that the harm can't get through. Fortunately, the front slice in this is vaccines, and it's got a very few holes. So this is great. It's the most recent layer we've added, but this is on top of everything else we've already been doing. And we know that Trinity has done so well since August. So masking, distancing, washing our hands, all those things are really important. And vaccines are part of it, but there is no vaccine that is completely protective. And we'll talk through some of the details of this and what we know and don't know about the science. Next slide, please. Okay, how do these vaccines work? And I think this is real important to talk through some of these elements of a vaccine. So I'm going to start with just the basics of why we give a vaccine. So we give a vaccine to people to help stimulate an antibody response, those immune cells that help block that virus from coming into our cells and causing all sorts of damage that makes us sick. I also think it's important that you can take a whole course on vaccine technology, and there's vaccines for bacteria, there's vaccines for cancer now, but everything we're going to talk about tonight are viral vaccines. So we're really going to focus on vaccines that target virus. And when we develop or give vaccines for a virus, what we do is we try to give a part of the virus to our immune system that it will identify, and it will develop those antibodies or those immune cells and prevent the infection from either getting bad in us or happening at all. In the case of coronavirus, what we do is we give the spike protein. The spike protein was chosen because it's on the outside of the virus cell. That's important. You want something that your immune system is going to see right when it comes in the body and not after it's already entered the cell and started to make you sick. So the spike protein was chosen, and that's why it's gotten so much attention since the pandemic began. So what we do is we'll give the body a way to see just the spike protein, not the whole coronavirus. It can't make you sick, and develop your antibodies to that. And on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about these mRNA vaccines. So mRNA is messenger RNA. If I could have the next slide, please. Great, thanks. And what we do with a messenger RNA vaccine is we give a small piece of that mRNA, and all it does is it carries a code to make a piece of the spike protein. So it goes into our cells, our ribosomes, which is just a part of the cell. You may be having some flashbacks to your high school biology days. And it produces a little protein, a little chunk of the virus that is normally on the outside of the virus. Alone, this can't cause any infection. And that little piece of virus, our immune system sees and begins to develop those protective antibodies against coronavirus severe disease. And that's really all that happens. The little mRNA piece that we give to our bodies to help produce that piece of spike protein is actually very fragile, and it requires a very delicate delivery, and it doesn't last very long in your body after it gets to the cells to be made into the spike protein. And I think that's also really important. This mRNA does not last in us very long at all. In fact, when they were developing these vaccines, the bigger concern is it wouldn't last long enough for us to get a response. So scientists were very pleased that they were able to develop a delivery mechanism to actually get mRNA where it was needed. So that is a very quick explanation of how our mRNA vaccines work to give us this immune response. I think there are some real important things. mRNA is distinctly different from DNA. It never gets to the part of the cell that has our DNA, and it doesn't change our DNA. Again, it's just a little code that comes in and lets us make a little piece of that spike protein, which cannot make us sick, and then present that to our immune system so that we get an immune response without actually having to see the coronavirus itself. Next slide, please. So this is a new technology. This is our first mRNA vaccine. And I get asked a lot by friends and colleagues, how were we able to do this so quickly? We've all heard how many years it takes to make a vaccine under normal circumstances. And the good news about a lot of these vaccines is that there's usually a carrier or a technology platform built. And then once we can identify that piece of virus that we want to have our immune system react to and make antibodies for, it's fairly easy to adapt these vaccines to those new viral pieces. And that's exactly the case. So we lived in Rochester for a long time, and part of my work there was actually working with mRNA vaccines in clinical trials. These have been in development for 30 years. And you might ask yourself, which would be a very good question, if these have been in development for 30 years, why is the first time that we have these vaccines for this coronavirus pandemic? Well, the answer is for all the reasons you hear on the news about why it's hard to deliver them. If I came to you and said, I have a great new flu vaccine, but it has to be stored at -80 and it's very fragile and it's hard to ship and it's hard to deliver and it takes 2 doses. That probably wouldn't make it very far in marketing when we already have good flu vaccines on the market. But in the setting of a pandemic, this was a perfect opportunity for us to move this technology forward and to do it quickly, more quickly than we could have with some of our more traditional vaccine platforms. So that's how we were able to do it. I will tell you though, the FDA has not cut corners in their reviews. So this has been an all hands on deck scenario where everyone has pivoted. So unlike other vaccine trials, there was tremendous interest from the public in enrolling in these studies. Unlike other vaccines that are under development.
You okay, Bina?
Sorry. Unlike other vaccines that have been under development, we were actually able to make vaccine before they're FDA approved and have them sitting in warehouses. As an example, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that's going in front of the FDA on Friday already has 4 million doses ready to ship. We've never done that before, taken that risk with making vaccines before we know they work. Now, the FDA is still reviewing large packets. And just to give you an idea, the public documents came out today that the FDA will review on Friday. And there's over 300 pages of data about the vaccine. So we haven't cut corners in terms of the studies that were required. We just did a lot of the steps that we normally do in sequence at once. And we had literally every possible hand on deck to get these studies done quickly. Next slide, please. So are they safe? Every indicator are that these vaccines are very safe. We can talk a little bit later about some of the things that have been seen in clinical trials, but are mostly mild and transient. We know that we have given these vaccines to over 38 million people in the United States. And again, side effects are very infrequent. We aren't allowed to give these vaccines without approval of the FDA, which includes a thorough safety review. And there is ongoing monitoring all the time. If any of you on the call have already received your vaccine, you actually be part of the ongoing monitoring program called vSafe, which is collecting data on the safety of these vaccines long-term, and as many people as will participate in the CDC surveillance program. Next slide, please. So again, and we've gotten this question from this group, and I think we've all received it from friends and colleagues who want to know, this vaccine does not change your DNA. Your DNA is contained in your cell nucleus, and the mRNA never enters that part of your cells. So it is completely separate from it. And again, the mRNA breaks down very quickly after it makes that little piece of spike protein that it wants your antibodies for. So no change to your DNA composition when we give these mRNA vaccines. And next slide again. So we often get asked who should get the vaccine and who should not get the vaccine. The answer right now is just about everybody should get the vaccine. Getting vaccinated and getting to what you may have heard on the news called herd immunity is very important to us to be able to go back to life as we're all hoping to very soon and visit our family and friends and have larger gatherings. There are a few people we don't have vaccine for. One is currently there's no vaccine approved for anyone under the age of 16. Now, there are lots of studies ongoing. We can talk about that later if you have questions. You may have seen that on the local news because there are a lot of participants in our area who have in the pediatric vaccine studies that currently enroll as young as 12 years old and soon to be as young as 6. There are certain allergies, and I'm going to turn it over to Adia in just a second. She's going to help us with that. And then also, if you've had COVID and as part of your therapy, you got one of the novel treatments, either called monoclonal antibodies or convalescent plasma, you need to wait at least 90 days before you get your vaccine, which is very important, just to be sure that you get maximum effectiveness from that vaccine. So that's just a very quick overview of some of the differences about these new mRNA vaccines. And now I'm going to turn it over to Adia for some more of the clinical perspective.
Next slide. So, now we're going to transition just for a couple slides and talk a little bit about what to expect, some of the most common things, that people have questions about should they get the vaccine. One of the things that's important to discuss is around allergies and mRNA vaccines. There's been a lot of concerns about potential anaphylaxis or severe reactions to the vaccine. And right now, as Libby said, we're currently getting the J&J data. If you could go back to that one slide, please. Thank you.
Apologize.
That's okay. One more, thank you. So, we are still being able to process that Johnson & Johnson data, but as far as Pfizer and Moderna, when we looked at some of their data from just the beginning parts, from December to the beginning part of January. You can see here, we have all vaccines have a vaccine adverse event reporting system that the government has set up. Out of all the doses, 1.8 million first doses in Pfizer, there was only 21 cases of severe anaphylaxis. And then with Moderna, they vaccinated, they had first doses of 4 million, and there was only 10 cases of anaphylaxis. So it's actually pretty rare. Obviously, if you've had that kind of reaction, it can be pretty scary. So the CDC has released some guidelines about, for providers about what to do. Next slide. Compared to a lot of other vaccines, what's really exciting about the mRNA vaccine is there's very little of the most common type of allergens in the vaccine. There's no latex, there's no egg, there's no sulfa, there's no dye. This slide is taken directly from the CDC, and actually at the end of this portion of the slide deck, I will show you a link for the CDC so you can look it up yourself. But really, this slide shows you the vaccine components that are in there if you're interested in that. The real one that you may have heard a lot about that is an absolute contraindication of getting that vaccine is if you're allergic to polysorbates or what we call polyethylene glycol. So for those of you that the everyday name of that is probably Miralax, or if you had a reaction to a colonoscopy prep, that's one that we really say is a contraindication. Now, some people might say, well, what if I had a reaction to something that had that mixed in it? Because and then you can't really tell if it was really due to what we call the PEG or the Miralax type medicine or to other things. The CDC has said, you know what, because if you can't really point to the polyethylene glycol or polysorbate, that you can still get the vaccine. You just need to wait for 30 minutes to make sure you don't have a reaction. But I think it's really important for people to know that there are very few, common allergens in this actual vaccine. Thank you. Next slide. So when you go and get your vaccine, they're really, the providers that are going to be in there really are triaging you. And you can also help be prepared for this by going to the CDC website and looking through this checklist. But really what we're trying to figure out is that other than, identifying in that red box over here about who not to vaccinate, they're for the most part, the green and the yellow categories really have to do with, you should definitely still get a vaccine, but it has to do with your observation period and whether there's a small possibility of some type of reaction, but they are not contraindications. So again, we say that the absolute contraindication, if you get the first vaccine and you develop anaphylaxis, and let me define that for a second, that's really, stuff like hives, your throat is closing up, shortness of breath, low blood pressure, your voice is really shaky, those kind of combinations, really bad sweating and just breaking out in a rash within 15 to 30 minutes. If you have that after the first vaccine, then you're definitely not going to get the second vaccine. Or if you have a history of an allergy to one of the components in the vaccine. Otherwise, if, for example, you see on the green that you have allergies to food, pet, insects, seasonal allergies, or you maybe have one allergy to, an antibiotic, or if you have a mild allergy that doesn't require an EpiPen, you can still get the vaccine. We're just going to observe you for 15 minutes, which is just the default. If for any reason that you have had anaphylaxis to a vaccine, any other IV or injectable medicine, or just had what we call idiopathic, they can't really figure out why you had a reaction, then what we want to do is observe you for 30 minutes after the vaccine. But that really breaks down the main categories. Next slide, please. What are some other general advice? A couple of things to think about is, number one, you want to avoid getting this vaccine in the same time period that you're getting other vaccines, usually around 14 days. I've had a couple of people ask me, like, I'm getting my shingles, how far should I space apart from the COVID vaccine? It should be at least 14 days. Part of the reason for that is that we're unclear. This is new and the science is evolving. So we want to make sure there's not going to be any interaction or between the vaccines. So we ask people to wait. The other thing you may have heard about in the news is about avoiding getting a mammogram for several weeks after the vaccine, because the reason for that is that some people, even in the studies, if you look particularly at Pfizer, that there were people that got on the side that they got the vaccine, they got swollen lymph nodes. And that was really, an example of their body beginning to ramp up and really try to remember those and develop the antibodies. But if you have a swollen lymph node and you get a mammogram around that same time, it can maybe make people think that they might have breast cancer and they really don't. So that's why they say that. And then infrequently, people that receive dermal fillers, like in their face, might have some swelling at the site of the filler, usually around their face or their lips, or right around the dose of the vaccine. But it's temporary and it will resolve with steroids, and it's not a contraindication to getting another vaccine. Libby or Mark, any other thoughts about these? Anything else I missed? All right, we got a couple more here. So next slide, please. One of the other things that I get a lot is like, what should I expect? Again, we want to reiterate that this vaccine does not contain live or any kind of, live portions of the virus. It's just part of the protein. So you can't get COVID from this vaccine. Now, your body, though, what's kind of cool, I think it's kind of cool, is that, there are many times where when you get the vaccine, your immune system starts revving up and really preparing to make sure that it has an active memory of that spike protein, so that if you get exposed to it, it's ready to go. Now, not everybody gets side effects. So, but it's just, we want to make sure people are aware of these side effects just in case you get them, so you don't think there's something wrong. A lot of people get a sore arm. They may get some muscle aches, be tired. Some people get low grade fever and a headache, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you necessarily have COVID at all. The start is usually between 1 or 2 days after the vaccine. And again, it's really important to know that this really means that the vaccine is really working. One of the other questions that comes up with this, people say, well, I don't want to get those symptoms. So can I take Tylenol or Motrin or ibuprofen beforehand? The CDC has really asked people not to do that. Now, if you're on it, related, if you're taking a baby aspirin or something like that for some of your chronic medical conditions, we're not saying that you should stop that, but you shouldn't try to pre-medicate. There's really, the science about that really goes to, there was a small study in mice potentially that said that, people that, in the mice, that had COVID, by taking some Tylenol, giving them Tylenol or ibuprofen, that maybe it decreased the immune response, but it really small. And so we really don't have good data on that. But I would just say that because things are new and evolving, and they saw that, they're really asking people not to pre-medicate. But once you get the vaccine, and if you have symptoms, and if you talk to your doctor and you are a candidate to take ibuprofen or Motrin or Tylenol, then you can go ahead and take those. Next slide. So what do I do if I have symptoms after the vaccine? This is a really good question. I think what I would say is it depends on what the symptoms are. If those symptoms tend to be those symptoms related to what we know can happen as a response to the body revving up and the immune response to the vaccine components, then you're fine. We will say that you don't get, until you get your full 2 doses, you're not really ever fully protected, but that you won't get the maximum protection until you get those 2 doses. So it is possible in those couple of weeks between doses that you could get COVID. And there have been examples of that. And so that's why, you got to wear your mask, and you can't, you got to still do all those things. And so it really depends on the symptoms. And you would need to really work with your healthcare provider, or if your employee occupational health, to really sort that out. But in general, the things that I told you on the previous slide are the ones that, the muscle aches, the arm pain, the fever, little low dose fever, the muscle, and those kind of things are usually seen as normal vaccine reactions. Libby or Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
No, other than just my personal experience and that of a number of folks who I work with, is just fatigue really was kind of the main symptom. Not even fever, no respiratory symptoms, but just expect a little of that after the second dose, I think is common. Which shows that it's working.
Hurt. Yeah, I know, my arm hurt, and I had a little muscle. It just felt like I had gone on a long run. But other than that, it was fine. So we tell you that so you wouldn't be surprised or scared if that happens, but it may not happen to you. So, and if it doesn't, that doesn't mean the vaccine didn't work. So, just wanted to show you that next slide real quick. I just wanted to show you, if you had questions about where to go back 1 slide, please. The CDC, these are some websites that the CDC has published. And so this is the latest government information. You see the one on the left says myth and facts about COVID-19. And then the other one on the right side is really for a lot of doctors and other clinicians, but it does have, you go to that second one, the second link on the bottom, it does actually have all of the list of the components of the vaccine and the contraindications and some of the things that we have talked about. So that it concludes kind of the lecture portion, and we hope that this has been helpful for you. And we'll now turn over to the Q&A.
Thank you, guys. That was a great way to start. We collected some questions ahead of time, and we're going to start with those. For those of you who have questions tonight, you'll be able to enter those questions at the bottom of the screen. And we're going to go question by question and see how many we can get done by 8 o'clock or until our panelists run out of energy. But we're excited. They're excited. And we have slides for some of the questions that we had prepared in advance, but we won't have them for the other more current ones as they come in. So the first question I have tonight is, I am at low risk of severe COVID infection. Why shouldn't I just rely on my natural immunity to protect me?
Libby, do you want to take that one?
Sure, anyone can. You know, there's a lot of reasons, and first of all, we don't know yet for people who actually get COVID how long their immune response lasts. But we have such robust responses to these vaccines that are out there. We think that they will be more long lasting than from a natural COVID infection, especially if you have COVID that's mild. There's great evidence out there that people who have more severe disease get a bigger antibody response, but a lot of disease is mild, but that antibody response tends to wane. And we are seeing now in the literature and in local cases, people getting infected for a second time. So we don't want you to just rely on the fact that you may be exposed to the virus or that you may not get very sick. We've talked a little bit about this amongst our group, and I'll tell you that when we try to develop guidelines for how to treat patients in the hospital, a lot of that is part of trying to determine who is at risk for getting most sick. And there's often no real rhyme or reason. It might be a previously undetected underlying health condition, or it might be a factor we just don't know yet. You know, we've only had this virus a little over a year, and we learn more every single day. You know, things we thought at the beginning, we realized weren't necessarily the case, and this is different from any other virus we've ever had to deal with. And a lot of our initial assumptions were based on past pandemics with different viral pathogens. So we don't necessarily know really who truly is at high or low risk. And we have certainly seen very severe disease in very young patients, including unfortunate outcomes in patients in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And so we think it's important for everyone to protect themselves. Also, because the virus hasn't happened that long, you may have heard on the news there are people with long-term effects from this. And that's something we also have to consider. We don't know the long-term effects of having the virus. And there are certain viruses that can have quite long-lasting, significant debilitating effects. And then also because you can still transmit the virus to others. And we can talk about that in relation to the vaccine. You know, the vaccines, when we say they're effective, they're shown to prevent moderate to severe disease. So people who get symptoms and get sick and get tested. It makes sense, and some of the data are emerging that people who are vaccinated are also less likely to spread. But we don't have any vaccine with 100% efficacy in terms of preventing any disease or preventing spread to others. So it's important that we consider all these things. You know, getting vaccinated protects yourself from getting severe disease and having serious complications, but it also protects the community. And the more of us that are immune to the coronavirus, or at least having an attenuated or less severe case of the disease, which is what happens if you get the vaccine and you happen to get it, we are less likely to spread to others, and we will see community rates drop. So it's just really important for us to do this to protect ourselves and each other. Adia, Mark, anything to add?
Sure, that was perfect, and I agree with obviously all of your points. So those are the most important ones. I think people who you would not expect to get quite sick or even die from coronavirus have gotten sick or died, and it's in a way similar to the flu, where healthy people get critically ill and sometimes die of a disease that we think is kind of just a normal thing. And obviously coronavirus has done a lot more damage nationwide and worldwide than the flu, but there's some analogy there that to most of us, we think we probably won't get that sick. Do I really need to get the vaccine? But the truth is you might, or you may have lingering effects. People have lost sense of taste and smell for months now, and may or may not recover that. So even seemingly minor effects could be a part of your mild disease. And then I think the last one is is important. And I just wanted to bring the perspective that we don't think of children being too severely affected by coronavirus, and that's actually true. Kids are probably most of the time asymptomatic. Some are critically ill, although that's rare. However, we have seen increasingly a post-viral inflammatory reaction called multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children that is life-threatening. And while it's rare, even in my own hospital, we take care of probably one or two a week sometimes, depending on how the community spikes in the adult disease are going. So it's not a benign, it's not a minor thing for kids to get coronavirus, because some of them may have later reactions later on. And I think as we consider as adults, teachers, parents, whether or not we'll get the vaccine, thinking about the children that we're around is also a worthy of consideration. And I think for me is a reason definitely to do it. Any other comments?
No, I think you guys summarized it really well.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question says, I've already had COVID-19. Do I still need to get the vaccine?
I can take this one. I think Libby really addressed this pretty well. I would just say that, when you go to the CDC website, there's not an exact timeline that you have to wait, except that we want to make sure that you are no longer quarantined and that you don't have a lot of symptoms. And that quarantine period really is nuanced, and it really depends on, if you're hospitalized, if you're not, how severe it was. So it's not just like, it really has to work with the health department and your providers. A lot of us, you'll see, will ask people to wait 90 days. And part of that waiting period is a couple things. One is, like Libby talked about, is that we do think you do have some protection, some antibodies from future infections in the first 90 days, but it seems to wane after that. And so we want you to get the maximum effect of the vaccine. So a lot of times we want people to wait, in addition to the fact that, we do have a limited supply. So we're asking people to think about others as well, because you have a little bit of protection and there may be people that don't. And so how do you kind of modulate that? But right now, the CDC, has said that there really isn't any exact guidelines, except that you want to wait until after you're not in quarantine and not symptomatic. But a lot of us are really trying to say, 90 days. Anything else to add to that?
Okay, our next question is, can I get the coronavirus from the vaccine? And if I could, should I avoid the vaccine if I have a weak immune system?
I can take this one because we just have been meeting about the transplant ID patients, or transplant patients at Duke. So there's no live part of the virus from the vaccine. There is no chance of getting COVID from the vaccine. Like Adia said, we have seen a fair number of actually our healthcare colleagues so far who get COVID in between the vaccines. So you're not fully protected after your first dose, but that's not from the vaccine at all. And if you have a weakened immune system, there is a chance you may mount less of one of those antibody responses, but it's still worth getting it. Any protection is helpful, and it may make the difference between a severe case and a milder case. So we are still recommending that all patients, even with weakened immune systems, get it. It's no risk. The only consequence might be slightly fewer antibodies.
And I was gonna say too, I had a couple of cancer patients ask me as well, Libby, and I'd love to hear your perspective on that. But what I've been telling them is, you need to obviously work with your oncologist, because if you're in the middle of getting chemo or you just had a bone marrow transplant, you want to make sure the timing is good to have that maximum response. But it doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't get the vaccine, because you're also you're the most vulnerable. These people are the most vulnerable. And so, it's all about the timing to get the maximum effect, but it's not a contraindication. But I'm not sure if you guys talked about that as well today.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about this, and we also talk about it in the setting. So one, it is important if you can time it, especially around particular therapies. If you're going through cycles where you will get a little bit of immune recovery, we try to wait and keep you super, super isolated and protected during those times, which we do normally, even outside of coronavirus times. So maybe there's a little bit of a timing aspect to it. But overall, for the majority of patients, if it's a chronic condition, even if you're someone who has a history in the past, I've seen one question come in about autoimmune diseases, which can also, cause you to have a slightly weakened natural immune system, and it might be worried about that kicking up with this vaccine. There isn't evidence of it. And the people who write the guidelines for this have reviewed every case of vaccination in transplant patients with similar and not similar vaccines going back to the 1970s. I was actually in awe of the data they were able to present. This was an incredibly detailed review, and they just don't see evidence of these types of problems happening. So pretty much the advice is get it, get it, get it. And the worst they might say is if they think you have a very low immune response, there might be a booster a few years in your future.
Okay, our next question is, I'm planning on getting pregnant in the next year. Should I avoid the vaccine?
I think I can take this one, and anybody else can chime in. First of all, I just want to say, I was thinking about, when I see this question, I think about the fact that everybody's like, yay, there's this vaccine. I hear you. I hear all the things that you're saying, but what is the future hold? And how am I going to be assured that I'm not going to get COVID now, but I'm not going to have some long-term side effects? So number one, I just want to acknowledge that, we don't have a crystal ball. There is a little bit of a leap of faith in this period of time, because we haven't had our normal periods to actually follow people for 24 months while they're in the vaccine trial and do that. However, I think, and we can talk a little bit about this as well, just why did we get the vaccine, is because, from our standpoint, some of the things Libby and Mark have said, we've seen a lot of stuff. We've seen a lot of people that, we thought we're gonna do well that necessarily didn't. And so I think that it's really a risk benefit. So I just want to say that and acknowledge that, because I know that people are thinking that, but yet, and we all know that as the scientists or the physicians or pharmacists, but we still got the vaccine because we're kind of like, what we know now and the risk of COVID and the severe risk and how not knowing what our response is going to be, we have to deal in the here and now. And we feel like, like Libby said, some of these things are really robust, and feel like if there was going to be a major reaction, most vaccines, it happens within the first couple of days, if not the first 6 weeks of a vaccine. So going back to this question, if you're pregnant, we have spent a lot of time talking about this too, across the globe. And there's limited data around mRNA vaccine safety in pregnancy, but again, it's not a live vaccine, doesn't enter the cell. We do know that although the absolute risk of getting COVID and having a bad response is low for pregnant people, but people that actually get it, your risk of having severe disease is actually pretty high, and having some type of complication in your pregnancy, such as preterm labor and other things, is actually a little bit higher. I think given the news, everything, you see the CDC and the ACOG kind of say, well, CDC says pregnant persons may choose to get vaccinated. And, ACOG, which is actually like, the society that really sets the guidelines for gynecology and obstetrics in this country, says we really should not withhold the vaccine from pregnant women. We at Duke have had several pregnant women get the vaccine, and also lactating women as well get the vaccine, because, just like anything else, you can give those antibodies through the breast milk to your baby. And so, we think it's an individual decision. If you're pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, you need to, talk to your OB. But I don't think, I think there were, and Libby can probably talk to us a little bit more, there were definitely people that got pregnant during the study. So some of these studies. So we kind of had some, and they were obviously able to get pregnant, so it didn't affect their fertility. So Libby or even Mark, do you have anything else to add to that?
Libby, you probably know more about the pregnancy related issues in particular. I would just emphasize that, like with immune suppression or autoimmune disease, the risk of severe complications of the disease outweigh any risk that we now know from many, many millions of doses of vaccine. So I think my answer would be overwhelmingly yes. And maybe worth just me trying to take a stab at the second bullet under the first bullet. And then Libby, maybe turn to you. I noticed there's another question that's come in about whether the vaccine alters our DNA. And I think people might have particular anxiety about that with pregnancy. And just to emphasize that it does not. It doesn't change in any way our genetic makeup. It helps the cells temporarily produce a protein that the virus makes that they can then trigger our immune system, but does not in any way alter our DNA. So Libby, I thought I'd just attempt that answer and then let you make it more sophisticated.
That's great. Well, I won't make it more sophisticated. Maybe I'll make the pregnancy question more personal. So, and I think I may even have some family on tonight, but in the Dodds and Ashley collective greater families, we've been asked this question. Tim and I have been asked ourselves. We reviewed all the data, and I can tell you everyone that has called me that is currently pregnant or recently having delivered have received a vaccine without incident. This is being very closely followed as well by that same program from the CDC. So if you go and get a vaccine and you register for the VSafe program, which a lot of the Duke healthcare providers have done, they ask you that if you're a female every single week. Do you think you're pregnant? I just answered my questions right before we got on. So it's something that we're gaining more data on. And again, we don't know a lot. We don't have all the animal studies that we typically have when we release a vaccine. We have some rat studies for Moderna. We have ongoing studies for Pfizer. And so far there's no signal. And there has been no signal in previous vaccine studies. I will also say that as a pharmacist, these vaccines, the 2 mRNA ones we have, the Pfizer and Moderna, are some of the easier vaccines to read about because I don't have to read a half page of excipients or extra ingredients. These are some of the purest, drug products that we have in the US today because mRNA is so fragile. So all that's in this vial is a little bit of diluent or, salt water, some lipid to help protect the mRNA and the mRNA. So we don't have to worry about some of the things we might often worry about with new drug products or new vaccines.
Our next question is somewhat related, and it goes back again to the idea, I think, of altering DNA, which is if I get the COVID-19 vaccine, can it make me infertile or sterile?
Libby, did you want to comment on this? Or I also had read about it, but I'm not an expert on this, but have definitely read about it.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to go ahead. I've also just been able to read.
So I think and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that there's this confusion because there's a spike protein that is actually part of the placenta. And I think people are confusing that protein and the fact that it's kind of like a spike protein like thing with the placenta and the need for the formation of the placenta with a vaccine spike protein, and they're not the same thing. And this, this protein, and so I think that's where some of the issues are, is that, there's some issue that this protein, the Centin-1, which is needed for the placenta to form appropriately, might in some way, because it's also a spike-like protein, affect the vaccine spike protein, and then there be problems with the placenta. So that was kind of, I think it's been debunked as kind of fake news. But Libby, do you have anything else that might be a little bit more sophisticated explanation of that?
Yeah, again, I think you already gave the best data, which is that we know that during the vaccine trials, there were many women who became pregnant. And so just showing that it isn't a direct attack on the placenta, and it has, again, it was a theory, and this is what scientists do. They come up with a theory and they test it. And this one hasn't, fortunately, panned out to be true.
So I'm be mindful of time. I think maybe we'll switch and do a few of the live questions now. And then if we have time, we can come back to some of them that we've captured previously. So one of the first ones is, if enough grown-ups get the vaccine to the point where we get close to herd immunity, was it still necessary to vaccinate children?
I can take a stab and then hand it over to Mark, who's certainly much more expert here. But I would say that the plan is right now, we don't have a vaccine for children. We have some robust ongoing studies. And eventually the plan is that we will want to vaccinate children to better protect everyone. But it takes a little bit longer to do those trials because we had to do dose finding. So right now trials are enrolled down to 12. All the data is looking good. I am happy to share, just to show how much we feel that these vaccines are safe. My 2 older children, Ben and Megan, are actually in the Pfizer vaccine study and have received both of their study doses. Both are doing fine, a little arm soreness after the second one for actually both kids. So we'll see how that goes. But it's just taking a little longer to get the pediatric vaccines right. The dose finding studies are done for the younger than 12-year-old kids for Pfizer. That's actually going to be opening locally in mid-April. And Moderna is also moving into it. The new vaccine by Johnson & Johnson also has some early dose finding studies in kids. and will likely be moving forward soon. So it's more that we had vaccine for adults that need to go forward, not that we don't need to immunize the kids. And Mark, you may want to comment. I know there's a lot of additional benefits to immunizing.
Sure. I would just say, as we mentioned before, kids do have complications, so just inherently valuable to protect them. And number two, they tend to be asymptomatic carriers and maybe spreaders, maybe to a lesser degree than adults, but still can. And so as we continue to encounter variations in the vaccine, which will keep happening on a regular basis, certainly every year, if not more frequently, it's important that people maintain immunity and reduce the risk of spread. I think the herd immunity stats are that something like over 80% of the population needs to be immune or vaccinated or have had it. And so if you took out every kid, that's 25% of the population. We don't reach that level. And so it's important to reduce the overall spread nationwide and community-wide. An important component of that is getting kids vaccinated too.
Yeah, one of the things I was also thinking, Mark, when you said that, is also how do we decrease the amount of variants, right, in the virus?
That's one way, right?
And so I think people don't think about that piece, that if we don't get vaccinated, then there's going to be additional variants, because the virus, like this is common among viruses. As providers, this is not something that we were shocked by, but if you're trying to not have variations and then having issues with the current vaccine being as effective, people have to get vaccinated.
Yep. Well, I think I'll tack on one little thought here on that, which is one additional advantage of the whole mRNA approach to vaccination is that as variants happen, and let's say that a more severe form comes out, the mRNA approach allows the companies to much more quickly develop and manufacture a booster vaccine. So we don't have to wait a year like with the flu. When H1N1 came out, it was going to be a year to figure out a vaccine for that flu variant the next year. Whereas with coronavirus, the mRNA approach allows that to happen much more rapidly.
Excellent. Our next question asks about whether the vaccine might cause antibodies to develop that would attack our regular or our healthy proteins in the future.
Yeah, there's just a little bit of information that I think is fueling a lot of these questions, which I think are good ones, because this is something that, unlike any vaccine before, we are having our immune system react to that spike protein that we make. So the question is, could that, if your antibodies will respond to something you make, could it respond to other normal things that you make? And there have been a few cases of patients with a condition where their antibodies attack their platelets, and it has caused them to have low platelets and bleed. There was an unfortunate case of a physician in South Florida who had this, and this really prompted a lot of these discussions. But honestly, we don't have enough information to really know if it can be vaccine related. When we see these, what they call autoimmune, your immune system attacking yourself, it can actually happen from having a bad viral infection itself. And in fact, that's the most often the cause. And so there is tremendous concern that if someone feels at risk from having such a disease, they are at more risk from getting coronavirus than from the minor yet unproven risk that may come from a vaccine that uses your immune system in the way that mRNA vaccines do. And this is something else we actually talked about in our meeting last week, because we had a patient with a history of one of these autoimmune low platelet conditions. And the decision was to recommend vaccine for that person who tolerated it. So small numbers, great question, but it's a theoretical risk that we have not seen in our data to date.
So our next question is again thinking long-term about the vaccine and whether it might have effects on children in utero or beyond what we know at the moment.
I think, beyond what, I think there's still a lot of unknowns, but I think based on what we have right now and what we've seen, it doesn't appear that there's any issues. Again, I think and correct me if I'm wrong to the other two clinicians on the line, when I think about something affecting something in utero, it'd have to be something with their DNA, right? Like I would think there'd have to be some issue and something that would affect or do something with the DNA within the cells of that baby, and that's not what we've seen. And so I think that's why most of us still feel pretty comfortable, and because there's been a lot of pregnant women that have delivered normal babies, that really isn't an issue. So I think it goes back to, and this is a nuanced thing for us, but is it affecting the DNA or not? And the DNA is where that a lot of that, if you get into the nucleus, where you would have a lot of those issues, and this does not. And so I think that's why it hasn't really borne out, but it's a really good question.
So our next question asks about, is there any advantage to being vaccinated by more than one of the vaccines?
Well, that's a very interesting question. That's what we call crossover vaccination in the COVID vaccine world. And we have all sorts of ongoing studies right now. Duke is actually participating. So everyone who participated in the initial Moderna studies in the region have been invited to get the Pfizer to see if that does anything additional, and vice versa. So nobody knows, but it's a burning question right now that science is trying to answer. So stay tuned for that one.
And this one's a little bit similar to that. Is there, if you can only get one dose versus two, what would the difference be?
So regarding that,
like the UK, where you're going to try to get one dose to everyone as quickly as we can, as opposed to the focus that we have here on giving 2 doses and having folks wait longer. Sorry for a bad question.
Oh yeah, no. You've hit the nail on the head, where the UK has taken a very different approach. And I think it's important to say there's no data with these vaccines, the 2 mRNA vaccines to be specific, given as a single dose without a follow-up. So there is some effect in preventing infection after the first dose, but we just don't know what happens or how quickly that will wane if we don't give the second dose. And that's just one example of how strict the FDA is being to their own internal guidance, and no corners are being cut. The FDA will not allow us to abandon the 2-dose protocol, because that's what the data show work. And while some have theorized that just a single dose will help in the immediate time to maybe quelch the virus a little bit, without really knowing that, the US has decided to stick to the data that's come out. Now, we do have a 1-dose vaccine that's going in front of the FDA on Friday, which might change that. But as far as those 2 mRNAs, and Adia and Mark, I don't know if you're hearing other things, but I know that has really kind of been our guide in this, is that the FDA is unwilling to waver on that data because of the limited data on efficacy after the first dose of these vaccines.
Yes.
Correct. I think it's, what we're trying to do. And that's what I think has been difficult for folks, even getting like mixing the vaccines, and we're getting, it's not that, I guess in theory, that it couldn't work and that's why they're studying. It's just that they want to make sure if we're going to give this to the public, that we're going to follow exactly how it was delivered in the trial. And I think that actually speaks to just how thoughtful the people have been to really keep people safe. And so that's kind of what the CDC has gone with, and the FDA. And I think that's where we plan to be for now. But it's exciting to know that they are looking at that. Now, what happens if, like, you, for example, because this question could also be motivated, like, I got this one vaccine, I don't remember what the other one was that I got, right? I think in those circumstances, there is databases, and you should keep there's a little white card that you will get when you get your vaccine that'll tell you what you got and the lot number and those kind of things. But if you lose it, there should, as long as you've been registered properly, a way to find that out. But I think in those situations, if people can't remember, then it's, the CDC said it's fine. But in general, we're trying to stick exactly to what was studied.
Yeah, I think we have time for a couple more questions. There are several questions here about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and how it compares to the mRNA vaccines. And I know it hasn't been approved yet, and so I don't know if you want to step into that now or wait, but people are curious. So I'll give you the chance to answer it.
Well, we spent our day on it, so I'll tell you, how about I go with the top 3 points of the J&J. It is not an mRNA vaccine. It is a more traditional vaccine that gives us the spike protein chunk. Again, cannot cause, it's a little dead chunk, but it directly inject the spike protein piece instead of having you make that spike protein piece. So a more traditional vaccine, 1 dose, and its efficacy is, so again, what is, because there's lots of ways to define efficacy. So for these studies, they looked at people who got sick, got tested, and then were positive and had moderate to severe disease. And this one, the number's a little lower. So the 2 mRNA vaccines sit right around 95%. This sits closer to 70% and has a lower efficacy in South Africa, which we think is due to that new variant that's coming out of South Africa. Now, I will say, and I want to remind everybody, those numbers, so some appear lower or better or worse. If you had talked to all of us in June and said, I could give you a coronavirus vaccine that worked 45% of the time, we would have rolled up our sleeves and taken it. Nobody expected efficacy rates of 95 or 70 or 60 or 56. So we are very happy with all those numbers that we're hearing. And we'll learn a lot more. Low side effects so far, but the data for the J&J looks pretty promising. And again, it's all out there if you want to go. We've read it today. So if anyone's having trouble sleeping tonight, that might be a good idea. It's long.
Libby, I was going to say to that point, one of the things that's exciting about this, as far as just being able to to vaccinate different populations, is because the storage is very different. And so that allows us, even if the efficacy is a little bit lower, it allows, we're blessed in this time and living in this area where we have the ability to get these deep freezers and do all these other things. But when you think about vaccine equity and getting it to different populations, this doesn't have the same storage requirements, which is why everybody's super excited about it, even though the efficacy is a little bit lower.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think I'll end us with the last question, which is probably the one that's hard to answer, but the one that people are very excited about thinking about, which is, if we do a good job as a nation of getting most people vaccinated, when do you think things might get back to our old normal? Not having to wear masks, not having to be 6 feet a distance, when be able to gather with our families in big groups, those sorts of things.
I think maybe we should each answer this, because I don't know that, as you said, that this is not known yet, but we are on track to have enough vaccine by summer that by mid to late summer, it is possible. The big unknown that we're all watching is these new variants. And so far, the vaccines are doing okay against the new variants. The drugs are doing okay against the new variants. But if we let our guard down too much now, we do run the risk of another surge. So in the most recent calls we were on with the CDC, what they said is, it is still within our grasp to have one more surge if we don't keep up all our due diligence, doing the right things, and getting more and more people vaccinated. So my guess is mid to late summer, as long as we all keep doing all the good stuff we've been doing to see the numbers come down as quickly as they have. Mark, Adia, what do you think?
I mean, I can hope. I mean, it's just the idea, I don't know how you felt, Libby. When I got my vaccine, I mean, I was teary-eyed. I mean, we were just so excited and just so grateful to have it, and just the possibility that even if it's longer than the summer, the idea that people are not going to have to die unnecessarily, our elderly folks, that we can hug and touch our friends and maybe get back to some normalcy. And, I'm willing to wait it out. I'm willing to, even though I've been vaccinated, I'm still wearing my mask, still keeping my 6 feet, still doing all those things, because I want to protect others and want to make sure that they're studying this and I'm doing my part. But yeah, I think the summer would be amazing. It'd be so nice. But, I just want to thank everybody in the community for what they have been doing, because we know that this is a sacrifice and we're all getting, COVID fatigue is real. But I think this is the best way that we can love each other and show our strength as a community to keep it up, and it just is so important. But I think the summer would be amazing. I mean, just dreaming of that and just talking with my kids about, wow, maybe one day we'll be able to do this again and that again. So, but really grateful to the scientists that are doing what they're doing, and thankful to the community for, partnering with us, because it means so much to us. I can tell you, and I know Libby's also volunteering in the vaccine clinic, to see you guys, everybody showing up, bringing their grandparents, happy, and to know that people are with us, because it's also been hard for the healthcare workers, and to know people are still keeping it up really helps our tank stay emotionally full as well, to help us continue to continue fighting. So, Mark, any words from you?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I lost my connection, so I missed most of both of your comments. So I'll go with whatever you estimated. I think you said summer. And I was going to leave one, Matt. I just saw another question pop up that I thought I'd answer instead of your question, which was, how does the flu vaccine efficacy compare to COVID? Which is interesting. Based on what Libby just said, we would be overjoyed with 45%. Well, that's about what the flu vaccine efficacy is. It's much, much lower. And fascinatingly, a study just came out this month that showed that children who had been flu vaccinated have less severe COVID symptoms. So in a way, a flu vaccine ended up being protective for them, even if they got the coronavirus prior to their own vaccination. So just a little plug for continuing our flu vaccine attentiveness, even as we hope that we'll all get coronavirus vaccinated. So that's all I have. Thanks for inviting us, Matt.
Well, thank you guys so much for being with us tonight. It's been wonderful. Your answers were so wonderful, and I'm so thankful for them. We're eager to share as much information as we can. We're thankful for your time. And we're looking forward to a day when we will all be able to get together at Trinity and celebrate. So thank you for tonight. I hope everyone who was with us learned something, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Good night.